All right, everybody, we're gonna get started now. So real quick before we get into it, by a show of hands, how many of you found out about this through a flyer on campus? Okay. And how many through an email from a professor or getting posted on Canvas? Okay, cool. And any other ways people found out about it? Word of mouth? Instagram? Okay, cool. Nice, awesome. Very cool. Awesome, so yeah, we're super excited to get into this. For today, we're going to give you guys a little background story on us, on OneSixOne Ventures, which is our organization. And then we're going to give you some context around the competition and talk about the rules, what you need to qualify, and then we'll answer questions for you guys as well. So, sound good? So we're going to kick it off with having Justice give a little bit of a background story.
Cool. So me and Pablo met in 2017 at the Entrepreneurship Club, actually. And we actually both went through the Gator Hatchery. Are you guys familiar with the Gator Hatchery? It's a student incubator here. So we both had our own startups, both had our own companies. We realized that there wasn't a lot of programming, everybody recycled the same speakers, and there wasn't a lot of venture funding. Just historically, 7% of all VC funding is in the southeast region of the United States. So we set out to solve a problem, just like any other startup. We were like, hey, let's solve a problem for startups. So we said, you know what, we're going to start to throw together these community events. They got extremely popular, and then COVID hit. So we had a long-term vision of starting an accelerator, starting a venture capital fund, all these big things. But when COVID hit, we didn't know what to do from there. We didn't know how long it was going to be, so we immediately in the next 2 weeks just launched our curriculum, put together curriculum, launched our program. So far we've done 4 cohorts. We've helped companies raise $6 million. We've helped them generate $5 million in revenue. And that's what we want to do with you guys. We want to help you guys go from zero to launch. We want to help you guys start your companies, launch your companies, eventually fund your companies. So that's kind of what we're here to do today. If you see some of the events that we used to put on, we used to take everybody to like CES. Have you guys ever heard of CES? Consumer Electronics Show. It's like the world's biggest tech conference. So we have a lot of cool stuff planned. We also want to do some stuff outside of the classroom, possibly a Tampa trip. We want to take you guys to some local tech offices, bring you guys some networking events. So there'll be a lot of cool stuff outside of the classroom too. We'll just keep you guys posted. Either we'll tell you here or we'll tell you guys through email. So that's a little bit of context about OneSixOne.
So I want to talk about 2 things that are incredibly important for a startup, arguably the 2 most important things, which is your idea and the actual founder, so you and your team. So we'll go through the idea first. And one of the best ways to come up with a good idea is oftentimes just finding something that's broken or something that's a big problem that people have to deal with. That's how a lot of the best ideas were started. You typically want to be in a market that's pretty big because that shows that there's a big need for it, that there's a lot of people who would pay you money for this, right? And that's, similarly, that's what investors look for as well. So one of the things, Justice was talking about our background in the accelerator program, all the companies we've helped in the past year and a half. We actually just became, a couple months ago, scouts for Florida Funders. They're the most active venture capital firm in the state. So they're investing in companies every single week. And ultimately, we want to be able to provide that as a resource for some of you guys once your startups are ready for that. So investors are looking for things that are in big markets or markets that are growing very fast, because that's how they're going to be able to get a return. And then typically it has to be something that you can easily explain for a couple of reasons. Well, for one, you're always going to be pitching. In a sense, you're going to be pitching to potential new hires, interns, potential co-founders that you want to bring on. You're going to be pitching to investors to be able to raise capital. And lastly, when you're trying to get customers and clients, you're going to be pitching to them as well. So you want it to be something that you can explain easily. And then arguably even more important, the founder or the founding team is critical to the growth of a startup and the success. So you always want to think about, you don't want to just sit and think, okay, I have this genius idea, right? You want to think, okay, what are the skills that I have? What are the passions that I have? And then how can I merge that with a big problem that I see in some potential market? So these are some of the questions you want to ask yourself. What are you good at? What are your natural skills, talents? What skills have you developed over the past couple of years? How many of you guys are programmers or computer science majors? Okay. So that's a really valuable skill for startups because a lot of nowadays software is just huge, and a lot of startups, almost every startup needs some type of software. So that's a big advantage there. So if you don't do software, if you don't do programming, then meet as many as you can while you're here at UF. That's going to be valuable for you. And then of course, what are you passionate about? It's going to be something that starting a startup is incredibly difficult, and it's going to get difficult at some point or another, multiple points probably, in order for you to succeed and grow the company. So you have to be passionate about it because there's going to come a time where you're going to wake up and say, this has been pretty rough. I'm ready to, just close it out and move on to the next thing. But if you're really passionate about it, then you're actually going to stick with it. And this is something that's actually really important, having a good team dynamic as well, right? Because if things get difficult, but you have two co-founders that are like some of your lifelong friends, then you're not going to give up when things get difficult because you don't want to let your teammates down. You don't want to let your best friends down, right? So it's important to have that type of history or that type of rapport and relationship with your co-founders as well. And then of course, being connected to the problem is really valuable. Some of the biggest and best companies were started by somebody who felt a problem or experienced a problem and then just went out and solved it. And we're actually going to bring in a speaker this fall, Jeff Hoffman. He was a former CEO of Priceline. And one time he was at the airport trying to fly somewhere. He was trying to fly from, I believe it was UK to Puerto Rico or something. And he was at the airport and he was in line to get his ticket. He was about to miss his flight. And when he got to the front of the line, he turned around and he said, "Hey, if I could give you a boarding pass right now, how much would you guys pay me?" And people were shouting. They were like, "I'll give you $5. I'll give you $10. I'll give you $50. I'll give you $150." And he came up with the machines at the airports that print your boarding pass. So he invented that. And that was a problem that he experienced and a bunch of other people experienced too. And then lastly, what's something that you need, which is similar to the problem as well. So I just want to go over some basics and background info. This context is important for the competition because it's going to matter as far as qualifying for the actual prize. So a startup is essentially a business that can grow very quickly and get very big. So this is, obviously like a restaurant, for example, is not a startup. So this is something interesting to note. A lot of software companies, mobile apps, oftentimes are startups. But that is something that's really important because, again, investors are not going to invest unless it's a potential to get 100x. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. And startups oftentimes need venture funding to grow. They need money to pump into whether it's customer acquisition or whether it's improving the product or whether it's hiring out a sales team. Oftentimes startups, they need to pump money into it and to grow. And you can't necessarily get a bank loan because startups are, oftentimes don't have good cash flow or a lot of money in the bank, and banks won't lend you money. So you oftentimes need venture funding. And typically, it's solving a big problem. And again, that goes back to having a big market. So what are some reasons that you would want to start a startup? I want to hear some answers from the audience. Independence, okay. That's a good one. Yeah, financial independence. Anybody else?
Bring an idea to life that you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely.
An idea with potential.
A what?
An idea with potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
It has something that you want.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great one. Anybody else?
For the better of mankind.
That's a great one. Yeah.
To help people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was one more.
To make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great reasons. Yeah, totally. What is it?
Money.
Money. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. We're going to talk about that too. So yeah, those are all great reasons, and we're going to go through some of these, but definitely, you guys definitely touch on the most important ones. Minus one, I believe. But yeah, absolutely. So money, of course, is one. It's a good way to, why not just work really hard for 10 years of your life, solve the money problem, then you can do whatever you want for the rest of your life, instead of having to work a job for the next 50 years. That's a good one. The other one is to solve a problem or make the world a better place, right? That's what startups do, and in multiple ways, right? If your startup is successful, not only are you solving a problem or pain point for somebody, but you're also creating jobs for other people and helping the economy. So that's another good one. To create something that you yourself need, absolutely, or solve your own problem. And then the last one is that nobody touched on is that you're going to learn more than you would learn doing anything else almost. You know, out of college, going and getting a job at a Fortune 500 or whatever company, you're going to learn more starting your own startup, without a doubt. The only other way that you'll probably learn as much is by joining an early stage startup, where you have hands-on access to the CEO, the co-founders, and you get to learn from them as well. So the amount that you're learning per unit time is going to be the best. So I want to go over a couple of just, throughout these 10 weeks, we want this to be, we want to incorporate a lot of case studies and talk about a lot of different companies that made it big. And this is something that we're going to tie in every single week. So today I just want to go through a few these are companies that were started by college students. So people who are just in your shoes, right? Freshman, sophomore, up to some of them PhD level. But in this case, this was an undergrad at Yale. And he started Dropbox, and that's the current market cap, which is another way of saying the valuation. But, you know, this example is somebody who was started in college, so we'll see another one. DoorDash, company that you guys all probably heard of, most of you have probably used. It was started by four kids at Stanford, who just realized, you know, why should we have to go walk somewhere to get food? Why can't we just order it, you know? And that's now worth $74 billion or $75 billion. So one that you guys all probably use, Facebook, Harvard dropout, I believe after his freshman year, so he was like 19 when he started Facebook. And again, people look at Mark Zuckerberg and they think, oh, this guy's he's a superhuman, like he's just a genius. But the reality is when he was 19, he was just like everybody else in the room. He didn't have any significant advantage other than he knew how to program pretty well. And Google, of course, was started by two PhD students at Stanford. They actually met in line waiting for the movie theater. So they were both studying computer science, but they didn't meet through computer science program. They met in line at the movie theater. And just for context, you know, Google was not the first search engine. There was actually 10 search engines that were started before Google. And so most investors turned them down at first because they were like, oh, what's different about you guys? There's already 10 other search engines out there, you know? So yeah, I mean, this is possible. But now I want to go through two examples that are actually local, that were people, you know, if you're thinking like, oh, these are like superhumans or super genius, but, you know, there's also people from UF who have done it. And we're going to talk about two of them. So this one is Fracture. How many of you have heard of Fracture before? Okay, so a few. We might actually plan a trip throughout the 10 weeks and go visit them. But they're up in Alachua, just 30 minutes away. It was started by two students here at UF. And basically, it's just printing photos on glass. But they've got a really beautiful product and expensive price point. And they sell a ton of them. So this one and the next one I'm going to show you, they're private companies, so I don't have an exact number for what they're worth, but I can estimate based on revenues and based on their last valuation, because they're still private companies. So that's an estimate. You know, they did pretty well. You don't necessarily need your company to be $1 billion to, you know, live a good life or to contribute to society and make a difference, right? And then the last one is Aiden from Feather, this company is actually, if you just drive down 2nd Ave for about 5 minutes. How many of you have heard of Feather before? Okay. Oh yeah, quite a few. So yeah, Aiden and Alex, they started when they were students. Aiden actually dropped out of UF, I believe his sophomore year. So again, these are people just like you. They were in your shoes at one point. They didn't have all the answers. It wasn't easy for them. This company was started because Aiden came up with an idea, and he said, you know, when you go to a conference, why should you have to exchange business cards? Why don't we just create an app where we could just kind of like exchange business cards digitally through a mobile phone. And that's how he started. And then it became really difficult to grow it and monetize it. He ended up pivoting a couple of times. He moved to Austin, Texas to join an accelerator for a couple months, and things weren't going well. And he moved back to Gainesville. And he had to pivot like four or five times. And nowadays, it's an event. Well, it was marketing software for big associations that put on big events. And then COVID hit, and they had to pivot again because they were selling their software to market events, and there was no events, no big events. So pivoted again, and they're growing fast as hell. So again, this is why the founding team and the entrepreneur is so important, because you're going to have to adapt, and you're going to have to, when things get difficult, you have to find another way to make it work. So, and this is, again, local example, somebody just like you guys. So it does sound really glamorous, and you can make a lot of money, but at the end of the day, it's incredibly difficult, and the majority of startups are going to fail. And this is why it's super important to be in a really big market or a really fast-growing market, because, again, 9 out of 10 startups fail. If you do the math, why would anybody be investing here if the majority of them are failing? Well, it's because that 1 out of 10 that hits it big, hits it really big, and they make a lot of money. And so this is why you have to be in a big market, because otherwise you're not going to get venture funded. So, for example, if, like, just throwing out an example, like if you're starting an apparel company, you could be very successful with that, and you can make a lot of money, and it could be a great business. But there's so much competition there that unless there's something really unique about what you're doing, like maybe you're making shirts that when you're walking around, it's automatically connecting you with people around you, just some software incorporated to that, who knows, then it's just an apparel company. And it's going to be tough to raise venture capital. So this is a good question to kind of use as a criteria for whether you are actually working on a startup or not. Can you see this company one day generating $10 million a year? And if it can't, then you should ask yourself whether the market's big enough, whether you're solving a big enough need, or whether do you even want to pursue doing a startup? Or maybe you just want to start a small business. And this is a number I threw out. A lot of investors, particularly on the West Coast, they actually look for, can this business do $100 million a year in revenue? That's what they look for, because they're investing at higher valuations, and there's a really big failure rate. Again, they're investing in a lot of companies. So it's a good exercise. If you do $10 million a year in ARR, like, you could be set for life. Like, you're in a good position, There's a local company, SharpSpring. How many of you have heard of SharpSpring? Okay, a couple. So to give you some context, SharpSpring, they actually just sold to a big company called Constant Contact. And I just looked at the numbers now because SharpSpring was a publicly traded company, so I could find all their numbers. So they did, I believe last year, $22 million in revenue, and they sold for $240 million. So if you do $10 million a year in revenue, then you can get a pretty big exit. So here are some of the rules for the competition. Again, you must be a startup. You can still participate in these weekly sessions if you're not starting a startup. It's still going to be valuable, even for small businesses. But to qualify for the $10,000, you have to be a startup. And you can always double check with us. And the reason for that is because the criteria we're using is if we were going to invest in you, which company would we pick, right? So it has to be an investable business. You must have at least one co-founder or team member that's enrolled at UF or Santa Fe College. So it's, if it's just two people in the community or maybe two startup founders who have been at it for 5 years, that wouldn't be fair. So it has to be somebody who's tied to UF or Santa Fe. You must send a weekly update, and we'll give you guys the guidelines for that. And it's nothing difficult, just 1 or 2 sentences, just telling us, okay, over the past week, I finished building the MVP or the website. Over the past week, I got my first customer or my first 5 users. Something really simple. And then we'll explain, we're going to have, we'll go over it after, but we're going to have a Slack group. How many of you guys know about Slack? Okay, that's awesome. We're going to be using a Slack group to communicate. So we'll send you guys the details on that through email. And then all you guys have to do is message us on Slack privately, either me or Justice, or actually both of us, basically. But we'll send you guys the guidelines on that. And then you must be able to demonstrate progress over the 10 weeks. You know, if you're not doing anything in the 10 weeks, then obviously you're not going to be picked. What we're going to be doing is, out of the companies that qualify at the end of the 10 weeks, we're going to be selecting the top 3, and they're going to pitch. We're going to have a big event. We'll have some investors there as well. And then you're going to pitch, and then we'll select a winner there. So that's how the grand prize is going to work. And then just a brief overview about the competition. So again, we're going to be having weekly sessions. This technically is just an info session. This doesn't count. The first session is next week. They are not mandatory, but highly recommended. You know, we spent a lot of time working on the curriculum, the case studies, and a speaker series. We're going to be bringing in some really great speakers, including the Chief Investment Officer of Florida Funders. So if some of you guys are trying to get your companies funded, that's really good exposure. And even if not, even if you just want to get a career in venture capital, great connections there as well. So yeah, again, those are going to be at 6:30. It should be about an hour long. Some may go a little bit over that, especially when we have speakers, and some may even be a little bit shorter than that. But that'll be a time that you can ask any questions as well. And then I mentioned about the pitch competition. That's going to be early December, but we'll keep you guys updated on the date once we lock that in.